In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes. The order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
There will be, in the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak. Producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies so that people will, in fact, have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. Aldous Huxley.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
Oh, God. But if you'd like to support the show, please, you can rate and review us on iTunes. You can share the podcast with your folks. Chances are, if you like the kind of shit that we talk about on the show, you probably know at least one other weirdo that would like the show too. So go ahead, pass it along to them. That's what they call little word of mouth, little grassroots. And of course, you can buy comic books. That's the best way to support the show. But if you guys don't like comic books, I don't know what you're doing in this society. I guess it's all movies now. Superhero, okay. If you guys like superheroes, you could buy some comics. We don't talk a lot about superheroes on the show because we talk a lot more about stuff like this. I'm sorry it's on my list of things to do is to stop snorting at you into the microphone. Well, my nose has been busted like 5 times. I could, it's hard enough just to get one nostril working at any given time. So before I record, I shoot some nasal spray up there to like open me up a little bit. And one of the side effects of that is the snort that I'm sorry. I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, everybody. It's a work in progress. All right. Recording schedule's a little bit messed up right now because I'm prepping for a little vacay. It's a working vacation though. Like I'm not totally kicking my feet up. My wife has this gigantic telescope and we set it up and we look at the moon and stuff, and try to find constellations and whatnot out of them. The problem is we live so fucking close to the city. Like literally I'm high up. When I bought the house, I made sure that, if a great flood happened, I would be safe for a little while. I also planned on like defensive positions within the home. Like there's one spot in my house where I could defend the front and the back door at the same time if I had to. It's also why I have very many guns. Anyhow, but I can literally see the skyscrapers of Pittsburgh from my front from my front yard. So we get a lot of this light pollution. So we're going out. We found a campground that's away from the city, and we got like the remotest walk-in to the forest campground there is. Like it's like 200 meters in. So we're gonna go out there and get away from this light so we can check out the city. And I need to unplug from my comics for a couple days and all that. I'm working myself into an early grave, everybody. Anyhow, I'm fucking sorry. While getting my shit together for the Mockingbird episode, I noticed in the Pike Committee stuff, the Pike Committee asked CIA Director William Colby about a publishing company and a few specific books. He answered that, these are one of the topics that he wanted to answer. He would answer them, but only in an executive session. He didn't want to reply when people were recording what he was saying. And I thought to myself, man, what the fuck was that all about? And then I also found it fascinating that Colby kept making the delineation between propaganda work, the propaganda work CIA did focused overseas, and he kept always saying that it was not aimed at the American people. And again, I was like, man, what the fuck is this all about? So friends, tonight, have you ever listened to the Beatles and thought to yourself, what is the big fucking deal with this? I just lost half my listeners probably. Have you ever wondered about what happened to art? We went from like these realist paintings and like beautiful landscapes to like cum shots on a canvas and calling it art. You ever wonder how that fucking happened? Have you ever wondered why we can't escape the fucking music of the 60s? Have you ever wondered that? Have you ever wondered why every fucking commercial, every time you fucking turn on the radio, every fucking time, some cool part of a movie's happening, it's fucking 60s songs? Have you ever fucking wondered that? Well, if you have, we might start peeling open this fucking thing right now. So tonight, I want you to mix yourself up a gin jihad. I want you to relax a little bit. And I'm going to tell you about CIA and how they produced culture and how they kind of produced the counterculture. Or if they did produce the counterculture. There, we'll leave it as a question mark. It's a little bit more appropriate. How did my nose get broken 5 times? Oh, geez. Let's see. I broke it on a sled when I was a kid. My dad made me play Little League Baseball for a year when I was in middle school, and I was awful. In warm-ups before a game, the coach threw a pop fly that I lost in the sun, I guess, and I didn't have the mitt in front of the catcher's thing. I didn't have my glove. I don't know what it's fucking called. In front of my face, and the ball broke my nose. I wasn't able to play that game. Subsequently, that's the only game that my team won that season, and I take it personally. There was a couple fist fights in the Army, and I got it broke in the wrestling ring once. A guy put a trash can over my head and kicked it, but he's like stupid because it's not like it was a Rubbermaid trash can. Anyhow, it busted my nose. I was pretty upset. All right, what do we talking about? What do we get into? A lot of this information from this first part of this episode is from an article that was written by this lady who's got the best name. Like, this is the best name for a lady that I've ever heard in my entire life. Her name's Eva Cockcroft. I feel like I'm adding a space in there. Cockcroft. Eva Cockcroft. Eva Cockcroft. She wrote this article called Abstract Expressionism, Weapon of the Cold War. And we're going to talk about it as like it's a case study on Jackson Pollock. I don't know if you guys know who Jackson Pollock is or what abstract expressionism is, but let's just a quick overview. He's a guy who dripped and splashed paint on a canvas. It was not a picture. It looked like a crime scene photo. But literally, that's what he did. He dripped and splashed canvas he dripped and splashed. I'm sorry. I'm having to divide my concentration for a second. He dripped and splashed paint on a canvas, and it was called art, and that was called abstract expressionism. So we're not going to just sit here and talk about and connect dots from the Beach Boys to MK Ultra and CIA mind control. We're going to get into that stuff eventually, but we're going to get into some deeper stuff. So, like I like to say, the show adds context to a lot of these things. So for these stories, we're going to go back in time a little bit, just for a little bit. And we're going to zoom back to just after World War II. America is just emerging as a superpower, and it was squaring up to go toe to toe with the other superpower, which is the Soviet Union, as we all know. We all know that, I would hope. The problem is that Russia, the Soviet Union at the time, was thought of as, they had this culture about them, whereas like this intellectualism, the great Russian novelists, and they had the art that their culture had at the time was socialist realism, which is basically like Russian victory music of the art world. It was characterized by glorified depiction of communist values, by realistic depiction. We're talking statues, we're talking paintings, we're talking drawings, that showed a lot of people working. There's a lot of digging and a lot of hammering stuff and a lot of military kind of stuff. And it was prevalent mostly 1920 to 1960. And I guess we're going to talk about why it only went to 1960. I think. On the other hand, though, American culture was seen as a derivative of European culture. It was seen as kind of like bourgeoisie. You know what I'm saying? So, I guess you can understand that, in a lot of ways, our culture is derived from the European roots, of the founding, I guess. So the CIA was looking for something to build up and to make American culture unique and competitive. Like I said, Russia was seen as, these very intellectual people stretching back to like the Tsar and fucking Catherine the Great. We need to be seen as intellectual and unique as well. They also, where they decided the arena of battle would be is this art world. So they needed a weapon to combat the socialist realism. This is an excerpt of Cockcroft's article. In the world of art, abstract expressionism constituted the ideal style for these propaganda activities. It was the perfect contrast to the regimented, traditional, and narrow nature of socialist realism. It was new, fresh, and creative, artistically avant-garde and original. Abstract expressionism could show the United States as culturally up-to-date in competition with Paris. This was possible because of Jackson Pollock, as well as most of the other avant-garde American artists had left behind. He had left behind his earlier interest in political activism. All right. So I kind of talked about Jackson Pollock earlier, but just a thing, he was an abstract expressionist, and, he just threw and dripped colors of paint onto a canvas. I'm sorry for driving this home, but this is like my pet peeve of the art world. I've probably listened to historians and teachers babble for hundreds of hours, on and on about this and why it's great art. And, I don't even really consider it art at all, but I had to listen to all this shit. It's great art. I despise it. I just despise it. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was busy despising it. I just thought it was absurd. The idea is, it's the art, like what's left, the canvas is incidental, the art that's left over is incidental. The act of splashing and dripping the paint is the important part. So think of it kind of like, I can't even think of it like as a Kleenex, and say you blow your nose or you cum in it or something, and you're like, okay, that's the art. The Kleenex with the wad in it is incidental. It was the act of the blowing of the nose or the jerking off that was the important part. And this is only just like what's left of it. And I just this whole thing is just, it's triggered me. It's everyone, I'm being triggered. You try going through art school and have not a different line, but you look at this stuff a different way than everyone else in the building, and it makes for a long fucking class, guys. It's like, you try to go in there and, these liberal teachers, are like explaining why this is, a great intellectual endeavor, and, how it's like, it's important for the art world or whatever. And you're just like, it's not, anybody could do that. Anybody could fucking do that. And their always answer was like, well, nobody did it except for this guy. So that makes it worthwhile. That is why I have to stare at a slide of fucking splashes and drips and listen to these fucking people talk. Dude, going into art school, with this critical thinking ability it was a very trying time for me, man. It was very trying. There was fucking enemies. I was surrounded. Enemies at all sides. But holy fuck, man. Art school girls, dude. It was worthwhile. Those art school girls are tremendous. Those art school girls are the best. Okay, so back in the day, there was the Museum of Modern Art was established. They call it MoMA. It starts promoting and pumping out this art and promoting this abstract expressionism. MoMA, by the way, is funded by the Rockefellers of State Department fame. We're going to go back to Cockcroft's article here. In terms of cultural propaganda, the functions of both the CIA. See, this, she doesn't know that it's just CIA. She puts this "the" in front of it. Hold on. I mixed it up dangerous, boys, tonight. Yuck. In terms of cultural propaganda, back to the article. In terms of cultural propaganda, the functions of both CIA, cultural apparatus, and MoMA's international programs were similar and, in fact, mutually supportive. As director of MoMA international activities throughout the 50s, Porter A. McRae, in effect, carried out government functions, even as Braden and CIA served the interests of the Rockefellers and other corporate luminaries of the American ruling class. All right, so in 1950, the Congress for Cultural Freedom came along. Their stated purpose was to promote American culture and values. The CFCF was funded by CIA. CFCF sponsored and promoted exhibitions of Pollock's work to place the U.S. in the forefront of global art and devalue socialist realism. There we go. Back to Cockcroft's article for the last time, I promise. Heralded as the artistic coming of age of America, abstract expressionist painting was exported abroad almost from the beginning. William D. Kooning's work was included in the U.S. representation at Venice Biennale as early as 1948. By 1950, he was joined by Arshile Gorky and Pollock himself. So, just a quick summation of this portion, because we're going to be moving on. A quick summation of this portion of the episode is we, as a country, coming as a clear victor coming out of World War II, looking to our next war, which was the Cold War, we needed to be portrayed as intellectuals. So the CIA funded a bunch of groups to promote this guy, to promote these guys who threw paint on a canvas and called it art. And it seems to have worked out pretty good. So we're going to be moving on here after this. All right, so we're going to reset our story a little bit. Now we're looking ahead to 1966 and 1967. A lot of this section of the podcast episode comes from a book Francis Stoner Saunders wrote called The Cultural Cold War, the CIA, and the World of Arts and Letters. All right, so we're resetting 66 to 67. There was this magazine called Ramparts. It was radical. It was this radical leftist magazine. Oh shit! This is where David Horowitz was when he was still a lunatic. To give you a little bit of an idea of how leftist this paper was, and it was also a precursor to Mother Jones and Rolling Stone. As a matter of fact, once Ramparts went away, people that worked there went on to create Mother Jones and the Rolling Stone. So you can see, if you don't know who David Horowitz is, he was this guy raised by some bright red commies in like a commune and everything. And eventually, through his work or whatever, he had realized the craziness of communism. And he flipped. He wrote a bunch of books. I think one's called like the Radical Sun or something. He runs a Front Page. I think it's frontpage.com. It's a conservative news website. Anyhow, this fascinating guy, fascinating story. If you're interested, magazine, Ramparts, launched an investigation on a bunch of these foundations, and hidden amongst the tax papers, there lurked a horrible secret. They found out that a lot of these company or these foundations, philanthropic foundations that they're investigating, were all being funded by the CIA, and they were all doing other stuff. So there's this thing called the Hobblesy Foundation. Stated purpose was to make grants to social services, educational, media organizations in Texas, especially Dallas. However, they found out that they were funding this Italian magazine called Tempo Presente, which was published by the CFCF, which was funded by CIA. The Miami District Fund, I don't know what the stated purpose is. I imagine to fund stuff in Miami. They were funding a German magazine called Der Monat, which was published by CFCF, which was funded by CIA. Then there was the Fairfield Foundation. When you listen to British people say this, though, they call it Farfield. So, I don't know. It's spelled Fairfield. The Fairfield Foundation published Encounter magazine. They funded Counter magazine, which was published by CFCF, which was funded by CIA. Hiding in the shadows, CIA was responsible for, since 1947, thousands of books, dozens of magazines, concerts, art exhibitions, movies, and seminars. And you're like, what movies? That's interesting to you. That makes your little ears perk up. What movies does CIA fund? Well, I could probably do a whole episode on movies the CIA funded, but just think of it this way. They had a hand in funding the 1984 and the cartoon, the Animal Farm cartoon. So, I mean, that's heavy duty stuff, and both of them are pretty anti-communist, and both of them are pretty in your fucking face about it. Let's see. Many other organizations were linked to CIA through this Congress of Cultural Freedom. A lot of these organizations didn't even know. They were not even aware that they were being funded by the government, U.S. intelligence. One example of this sort of open warfare, and like here, this is like a real world use of this stuff, of how they can use these things against an enemy. The problem with this little episode is that they were using these powers against American citizens. Example of this sort of open warfare in this arena, CIA got wind of Rampart snooping around the CFCF. And so they started looking at Ramparts. They start looking at their financials. They expected to find Soviet money in there. When they didn't find anything, some of the magazines and newspapers funded by CFCF started writing smear pieces about Ramparts. And they also went around blackmailing employees, screwing around with their funds. Ramparts survived this specific episode and the attacks, and they wound up publishing their articles on these CIA front organizations. It's interesting. One of the outings of the Rampart CIA exposure was Gloria Steinem. Isn't this crazy? Look at every fucking famous person we know is connected to the CIA. She worked for this thing called the Independent Research Service, funded by CIA, and they would send her to Europe to go to these youth festivals so she could show off how independent and free American women were. She doesn't talk about this anymore, but you could still find, there's a video on YouTube from back in the day when she addressed it. Basically, her stance was, I would have went anyways. They were just fucking paying me to go. Oh my God. Isn't it funny? She's still out there stirring up shit. Didn't she have something to do with these women wearing vagina hats? Walking around in Washington, D.C. with vagina hats? I think she did. People have this idea about CIA, like it's staffed with like uber Republicans. A lot of this, I believe, comes from that Family Guy cartoon where the guy's got like an alien living with his talking dog or something. Because he's like that. He's all like, dun, 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 dun. But I'm here to tell you, it's confusion. Like, CIA is not full of special agents flying around the world, killing people with rockets that fly out of their ink pens. They're not out there James Bonding the world. They're these fucking bearded, leftist fucking sociologists. That's all they are. And like, look, I can prove it. They're not out there, jet skiing and killing people with like laser guns hidden in their watches. Look what they're interested in. They want to make sure that you get out there and see some fucking shitty paintings. That's the shit that they're interested in. I think a lot of things confuse this idea, and I think a lot of it is the idea of when you throw the word nationalism into something, it creates it. I've been meaning to do an episode on the definition of the word fascist because this gets thrown around a lot today, and I think a lot of this confusion about nationalism really grays things out. Yeah, but don't be fooled, everybody. These aren't. Well, think of it this way. Think of it this way. Think of Benghazi. The people that got those people out of the shit. They weren't tuxedoed CIA guys with gadgets. The CIA hires ex-military guys to do that stuff. They're the ones that are carrying guns around. They're the ones that know what the fuck is going on. And I'm not advocating the movie 13 Hours or whatever it's called, but I mean, that shows a pretty clear delineation about what CIA thinks about these men of action. They pay them to stand around with guns, and you're like, can you be quiet while you're working out? I'm trying to work. I'm trying to shuffle these papers and work on my spreadsheet. God damn it. Oh my God. All right. So, we've talked about CIA creating culture, or at least fooling people into thinking about our culture. So let's talk about something that's a little bit more juicy to me, and it's this idea that CIA created the counterculture. And we're going to talk about that in 2 shakes of this. So, there's a book written by a guy named Dave McGowan. I think he's passed away now. It'd been interesting to get him on the show, but you guys can YouTube search him or jump on Stitcher and search him. He's done plenty of interviews. But he wrote one of the books he wrote was called Strange Scenes Inside the Canyon. And it's a play on, obviously, the Doors lyric, Strange Scenes Inside the Gold Mine. But his assertion is that CIA, under having to do with MK Ultra, which was CIA's mind control experiment, basically created the hippie movement. And a lot of his evidence has to do with tying together these guys and these bands with no musical training or experience, all of a sudden forming bands and getting gigs and all this stuff just working out of the same portion of LA, and he points a lot to their families. Their families are like military or intelligence families. Like the big one that everyone points to is Morrison's dad, who was an admiral in the Navy, and he had something to do with the Gulf of Tonkin. So it's all very interesting. But we're going to kind of steer away from this aspect. This will come back. We will do a show about this, but I wanted to instead talk about, talk a little bit about LSD and the counterculture. It goes hand in hand. It goes hand in hand. Also, another guy that talks about this is the friend of our show, Joe Atwell. He was actually the guest in episodes 1 and 2. He and one of his partners have this theory that that CIA actually created the Grateful Dead and the LSD counterculture. I believe the thing is like CIA creation counterculture, manufacturing the Deadhead, something like this. So if you guys want to find that, you go find that. You'll be a little bit ahead of the show then when we get to start talking about this stuff. Maybe I'll see if Joe will come on and talk about it. He was a great guest back when we did guests all the time, meaning 3 or 4 times. All right. Anyhow, so we're going to talk a little bit about just a smidgen about LSD. Cause really this, as we get into this, it goes hand in hand, and it was, the midwife to the birth of this hippie counterculture. So in the 50s, and hold on, I gotta lube up. Hopefully I made this thing a little bit more civilized, because that last one was this fucking savage. Yeah, so I gotta, you guys know I like to cook, right? I hope so. I got a cast iron skillet for the first time, and like I see that you got to do this thing called seasoning it. It's basically like you have to cast a spell on it before you can use it. So I seasoned it good, man. The inside of my cast iron skillet looks like glass right now. It looks like it's got a layer of glass on it. I've been cooking everything, and I just did cheeseburgers last night. I almost burned the fucking house down, but they were good. LSD. Oh yeah, LSD. In the 50s and 60s, CIA was experimenting with LSD. I have this in my notes here or whatever, but also the Army was doing it too. Their bio psychological warfare. Some department of the Army was also experimenting with LSD. They were trying to figure out how to make it into a chemical warfare weapon, and CIA was trying to figure out how to use it to mind control people. And they went on to create the hippies, and now we can't get away from the fucking Beatles music. Even today, they're making fucking... My mom's gonna kill me after this episode. She fucking loves John Lennon. Chemical warfare. All right. They would run tests on military men and students and prisoners and mental patients without their knowledge or consent. Soon, recreational use by young people helped birth hippie counterculture. The mid to late 60s. Timothy Leary, who is a famous psychologist and writer, was a giant proponent of consciousness expansion and the spiritual aspect of LSD trips. Did he and others like him affect a whole generation? When I say others like him, I mean like Terence McKenna, Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, and Mr. Aldous Huxley, who we heard from in the cold open. All right, so did these guys, the Merry Pranksters, all these guys, Did he and others like him affect a whole generation? Did they produce 60s counterculture? Well, there's one person who I hold in pretty high regard that thought so. Hunter S. Thompson thought he did. As a matter of fact, here is a quote from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. We were all wired into the survival trip. I'm going to try not to do his voice because I think that's hacky. So I'm going to try not to read it like him, but here we go. We were all wired into a survival trip now. No more of the speed that fueled the 60s. That was the fatal flaw in Tim Leary's trip. He crashed around America selling consciousness expansion without ever giving a thought to the grim meat hook realities that were lying in wait for the people who took him seriously. All those pathetically eager acid freaks who thought they could buy peace and understanding for $3 a hit. But their loss and failure is ours too. What Leary took down with him was the central illusion of the whole lifestyle that he helped create. A generation of permanent cripples, failed seekers, who never understood the essential old mystic fallacy of the acid culture. The desperate assumption that somebody, or at least some force, is tending the light at the end of the tunnel. I kind of slipped into it at the end, I'm sorry. I have documentaries on Hunter Thompson, and Fear, Loathing in Las Vegas is probably one of my favorite movies. So it really took a lot for me not to do that, guys. I'm sorry. So there are those out there like Joe Atwill and Dave McGowan that insisted Leary was an operative of CIA, and they get like into this shit, man. Like Atwill is like, he's like Sub-Project 58 of MK Ultra, and he's like got like I guess he's got like pay stubs. They paid McKenna and Leary, and he's got his shit locked down. But what I want to know right now is what you guys think. Like, do you think that Timothy Leary was working with CIA to spread the use of these chemicals for people to use recreationally, programming them? Do you think that CIA constructed these bands to put out this neo-tribalist kind of prehistory, kind of pagan vibe to folk music? You know, I don't know. But what do you guys think about it? Now, before you answer, I want you to listen to this. This is Dr. Timothy Leary.
Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout.
This isn't him, but he's coming up.
Would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit
This is him.
for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy.
So there he is. I want to know what you guys have to say about that. What do you think? Hey, I would really love it if you guys support the show. You can go to iTunes to rate and review. That's free. You can share the show. You don't have to put it on your social media so like everybody knows you're listening to me get drunk and babble about CIA and mind controlling the hippies of the 60s. But they did give us 8 years of Obama, everybody. You can share the show with your friends, though. Chances are you know someone that is a little weirdo like you are, and you might like to share the show with them. A great way to share the show, because I'm not selling you underpants or fucking granola bars and shit. Fucking MeUndies and all this. I am trying to get you to support the show by buying some comic books. If you guys like unique, quirky superheroes battling destructive mythical villains, demons and angels and such, and genies, Stigmata Studios might be a place for you to go and pick up some summer reading material. You go to stigmatastudios.com and just click the comics link, and there's links to get to all the places you can buy all the books right there. I think there's actually some free webcomics still up there too. So there you go. Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm, come face to face with an army of magically corrupted machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
That's what I say. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in and turning on and tuning out. I don't know how it goes. Well, here we go. Here's Soda Jerk. She don't like my drinking. See you next week. Hey. Hey. Hey.
Well, she likes the way that I can make her laugh. And she likes the way I stay real close. But she knows just what I do when things get bad. She says I'm wearing dead man's clothes. But she don't like my drinking, and I guess that's why she left. And now I'm back where she found me, drinking myself to death. I spend the rest of the night wishing she was at my side, 'cause she don't like my drinking anymore. She likes the way I hold her real tight, and she likes the way I sing out of key. But I know that she'll be leaving me tonight, 'cause she just couldn't make the best of me. She don't like my drinking, and I guess that's why she left. And now I'm back where she found me, drinking myself to death. I spend the rest of the night wishing she was by my side. She don't like my drinking anymore. She don't like my drinking, and I guess that's why she left. And now I'm back where she found me, drinking myself to death. I spend the rest of the night wishing she was by my side. 'Cause she don't like my drinking anymore. Well, I spend the rest of the night wishing she was by my side. She don't like my drinking anymore.
Thank you, Pittsburgh.